room. I went to club chat and I'm like, what's going on here?
I'll give.
Dimpo, coming in from South Africa. We have Rod from, oh shoot. Rod, where are you from?
Uruguay. It's from
Uruguay.
Uruguay.
I was like, is it Uruguay or Paraguay? I'm like, it's one of the
That's a
Guays.
classic. That's a classic. Yeah.
It's like, oh, because you start getting into like the self doubt, and you're just like paralyzed because it's like,
Yeah, it's okay. No problem. That's
I'm
okay.
sorry, I haven't been to either place. I think that's why I have no real
You
concept of
should.
either.
You should.
I really want to. I've wanted to go to South America for a long time, but and we have Nadir coming in from Pakistan, and so we're going to ask them to kind of talk about what it's like to enter the games industry in their territory, and what are the different challenges that they have that is unique to places that have less readily available, less gaming jobs readily available to them locally. With that in mind, who wants to introduce themselves? Dimple, you want to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Hi, everyone. My name is Dimpo. I am the business developer and operations coordinator for an indie studio in South Africa called Nyamako. Our tagline is we make African inspired games for a global audience. I've been in the industry for like 6 years now. I've worked at another game studio based in South Africa as well. Before Free Lives, they made a game called Broforce, Gorn, a VR game, or Gentle Jousting. And I've also helped create and run an independent games festival in Cape Town called Playtopia. Really lovely to meet you all. Hi.
Thank you, Dimpo. Rod.
Hi, my name is Rodrigo Alen Fernandez, but you can call me Rod. I'm from Uruguay, not to be confused by Paraguay. And I run a small indie studio called Art Game Studios. I've been around the industry for roughly 10, 12 years or something like that. Also help with the local and regional community development here in Latin America. Uh, I've been part of the board of the local association of game developers here in Uruguay and helped make a couple of events too, more specifically Game Lab and Montevideo, and also Level Louis, which is kind of like a smaller scale, but sort of pseudo GDC, if you will, that we do here. And yeah, I'm happy to share the experience in Latin America that I can bring and that I can share. And thanks for having me.
Okay, Nadir, are you ready to speak? Is your mic working?
We don't hear
Okay,
you. So
yeah.
what you can do, Nadir, is like introduce yourself in event chat. So we can go with text for now until you get your mic fixed. Nadir is typing. So Nadir, after you can like quit Discord and just reboot it. Maybe it will like kind of reset your audio. But yeah, once again, thank you for being with us today. I'm really excited about this topic in particular because it doesn't get much representation and it matters so much, right? So thank you. Okay, I will read it for everyone. Hey everyone, I'm Nadir, a game designer producer from Pakistan. I've been in the industry for the past 3 years and have had the chance to work on some awesome games in the local studios and would love to share what I can about the Pakistani industry. Beautiful. Masao, take it away again.
Okay, so I guess typically we do kind of like kind of go around the table with the same question, but I feel like since this is really kind of a introduction to each area, and we're going to take a little bit of a different format. Our individual presenters are going to talk about kind of the general tendency within the industry in their area and what the unique challenges there are for people who are trying to enter the industry. So, Dimpo, what is the game industry like in South Africa, and what are some unique challenges for people who are trying to enter the industry there?
Thank you for the question. So the industry in South Africa is a growing one. At the moment, it is still quite small. We have about, I would say, 5 studios with more than 10 people within the studio. So one of the biggest struggles is simply being able to work for a company that is based locally and is making games locally. But it's quite an exciting and interesting space as well because there is a lot of rapid growth happening within our country in terms of more studios being created, really good games coming out. Yeah, and that's kind of the gist of the studio. It's still very white and very male, unfortunately. There's no escaping that, but there's absolutely more of a push towards creating a more representative industry within South Africa. And some of the challenges are very similar in terms of being able to find work within the industry, finding financial support purely for prototyping or publishing, and game creation is also quite difficult, but still doable. Yeah, and that's kind of the long and short of the South African industry at the moment.
And where does most of the funding come from for South African games? Are the finances or the are the financiers coming from local territories, or is it coming from foreign entities?
It's predominantly coming from foreign entities. We have a few studios that do third-party work, so a lot of the funding from there comes from either publishers or international studios that those companies are working from. For the companies that are making their own IP, the majority of the funding, if not all of the funding, is coming from either international consulates or coming from publishers who are based in North America, Europe, just not in South Africa. We do have one mobile games publisher, but they're still quite small, and there's a lot of growth that's still needed there as well.
Okay, and would you say what is a like a typical career path for people who are entering the industry in South Africa? Do most people go through a game program and enter the industry through internships, or are there more indie developers that kind of make their own game and kind of make their own way?
So for a lot of them, it's developers who make their own way. It's a lot of micro studios, so between like 1 and 3, max 4 people who get together will create a game that way and release the game. As more tertiary institutions, universities, and colleges have started offering game design as a course, we are seeing that a lot of the newer developers who are coming up are usually people who've studied game design at this point and are creating their own games once they're finished with the university. For me, my pathway was a bit different. I got the opportunity to work at a game studio's PA, took it and ran because I've always been interested in making games. So while having a degree isn't a necessity, for being a part of the games industry. It helps a lot and substantially, predominantly for the ability to network and interact with the wider industry that exists, both from the levels of hobbyists to professionals.
Okay. Let's move on to Rod. So tell
Ah,
us a little bit about the what the industry is like in Uruguay and kind of like the South America in general, and what are unique challenges for people trying to enter the industry there.
sure. Then Uruguay it's a very small country. Just giving you a bit of context. It's like we're a small country between two of the largest countries in the region. Like we are between Argentina and Brazil. And what's rather interesting that's going on in Uruguay is that the industry here is rather big per capita, if you will, considering the size and the amount of people that we have around. Uh, but I'd rather go like broad scope and then like narrow down into Uruguay. It's like Latin America. I've been lucky to be around and talk with a lot of colleagues from the region and know about their experiences. And there's like it's super varied as in how each country is handling their growth, their challenges. There's nuance, of course, in the challenges of each country, but there's like a some broad issues are being faced by all of the countries, I would say, within the region. Like there's like a huge elephant in the room, at least when it comes to Latin America, which is a language barrier, an inevitable language barrier, because either we speak Spanish or we speak Portuguese, and the and even between Brazilians and the rest of the region, we have that language barrier. In fact, our bridge language is English. It wouldn't surprise you to see Latin American developers, ones from Brazil and others from elsewhere, talking in English between each other because we don't know each other's language that well. And what I mean with the language barrier is you need to know English to just have a bigger opportunity uh, when it comes to the business side of things, and because there's hardly any local demand for games. So especially for countries like Uruguay, which is very small, it's like always thinking of selling abroad, selling outside, and specifically selling to the states or countries that are or markets that are that size or that appealing. Uh, in the case of Uruguay, we've had a couple of successes. We do a lot of uh, we had like a big push for original IP in the 2010s. That was also uh, helped by the case study of Ironhide Studios, which created Kingdom Rush, the whole Kingdom Rush saga, and they've been doing real well. And that original IP translated into the state, the government, helping with some funding for like seed funding, if you will, to start more games and more original IP. And on the other side, it's getting back to making uh, service development, as in making games for clients, which is the case of our studio. We make a lot of games for Cartoon Network and other clients. But at least in Uruguay, there was like this big push to make original IP, and a couple of studios made it to the other side successfully. Others, of course, were left behind. But uh, and and yeah, I've been all. I'm talking like a bit all over the place, but it's just there's a lot going on, and I'm trying to just like give a broad picture of what's up here in the region. And when it comes to the type of games that are done, there's a lot of mobile games, mostly because of the barrier of entry, which is lower than uh, console, of course, and PC in most cases. And yeah, other countries, Argentina, Brazil, have Brazil, it's a whole other mystery because of its size and the language. But Argentina has been growing steadily, and in fact, I believe it's like one of the first countries in the region that had a brewing field for game development. Like Argentina were sort of the pioneers, and then we kind of the rest of the region, at least the southest part of the region, like learned from them. And some other countries have surpassed them, kind of like Brazil or even Chile in some cases, and others have like followed the steps more uh, in a parallel way, kind of like what we've done in Uruguay and some other countries from around the region. I don't know, just uh, throw me a ball and I'll just.
So let's talk about people entering the industry. So, are the people entering the industry typically coming from game development programs, or are they coming from more kind of like broad art programs or computer science programs?
It varies from country to country. At least in Uruguay, again in the 2010s, there uh, programs based on game development, game design, and whatnot popped up with varying results of their effectiveness, but at least they were there. Commonly, people are still getting into the industry not only by these programs, but also, as you mentioned, from like, for lack of a better term, classic places, as in either they study engineer or they study code or they study art or graphic design or stuff like that, and then they just throw the resume around studios and they get picked up. That's kind of like what's been going on in Uruguay. Again, Argentina has a lot of studies, degrees, and stuff related to both video games and animation, which I don't know if it happens elsewhere, but I've seen it a lot in the region that they're kind of like marry those two together when they're not necessarily that like similar. I mean, animation and video games. And
I mean, the tools are similar, right? I think from an educational standpoint, you see that a lot because basically they want to teach you how to use like Maya and Blender and, Substance, and what you do with it is kind of on your own.
yeah, but the problem, at least in Uruguay here, what has happened is since you're kind of having a degree that's actually literally called a bachelor's degree on animation and video games, you end up having people that are more focused either on the art side of things or game design, but not that keen on coding. And just because of how the degree is set up, it's like you don't really code that much because you're also teaching animation, and it's a weird thing. And it has happened in other countries within the region too. But I get what you're saying, but there's still like, at least in Uruguay and I believe a couple of other countries, there's not like a specific degree that involves specific game coding, if you will.
Okay. So, Nadir, how's your mic doing?
I think I'm back.
Yes,
Sorry for the tech.
it's
Yes,
working.
yes, yes. Hello
Yay.
everyone.
Yay!
Hello everyone. So
Amazing.
I'll
Welcome.
do a yes. Thank
Okay.
you. Sorry for the technical difficulty is a thing in the global south. Always happens. But yeah. So just want to. So I've been hearing Rod talk, I've been hearing Dimpo talk, and I feel like that there's so much similarity in between the landscapes, even though we were so far apart, that it was kind of surprising to me as well. So I'd love to dive into the landscape first before getting into how do you get into the industry to make those who are here understand like how Pakistani market works. So frankly, the Pakistani market currently, the game dev market, it's growing. Like that's obvious, right? But it's tiered as well. There's three different classes of studios I'd like to say that operate in the Pakistani market, and all three of those cater to a different, I'd say, vertical of the industry. So there's at one tier we have those who are working either in the services industry, that they're doing work for developers or publisher based out of the US or Europe. So the main in the industry itself, or there are people that are working in the mobile F2P industry. So they've partnered up with some of the bigger publishers, such as Lion Studios in a certain case. That's my previous employer, or Voodoo when it comes to hyper casual. And then there's a second tier, which I'd like to call the ASO industry, the App Store Optimization industry. And there are a lot of them, right, in Pakistan. But what they're doing is they're creating shovelware and sort of jam them up with ads and then pushing them out to Play Store and bringing in a lot of revenue through that. So from their own words, they're ad machines disguised as games. So that's a tier as well. And the third one is I'd say there's a budding hyper casual market right now in Pakistan, where people are trying to get those hyper casual games out, pitch them to publishers, try to get those published. So I've worked at one of those as well. So I like to go through like one by one through the three tiers and then tell you how you can break into each of those. So the way this happens is at the top, the first tier that I talked about, the services industry. There's only one studio in Pakistan that's currently doing console development. And the funny thing is that most of the console development kits aren't even supported in Pakistan. So we had to, while I was working there, we had to get them shipped to our partner in Europe and then bring them over here. So we don't really have official support, but we're working on them with for clients, for making games for clients. On the other hand, we have people that are working on their own products in the mobile match 3 puzzle categories, or there's a great puzzle platformer coming up. So there's that, right? And then on the ASO side, you've got hundred. So these, sorry, the tier one studios, there's just a handful. There's four or five or even like seven at max. On tier two, you have hundreds of studios. They're set up in houses. It could be a solo man setup. It could be a three-man setup, and then these tend to get bigger. But what they do is they grab a Play Store account, they grab a account, and then they just start creating the game based out of a template, and they just start pushing it out. So that's how that whole thing works. And the third one, like I stated, was the hyper casual one, where you make prototypes, you pitch to Voodoo, you pitch to any of the hyper casual publishers, and if it gets published, you go on and work on the next one, determine the model, right? So that's how currently the industry is working. As for making your way into it, as far as I know, there's currently no program in Pakistan, a bachelor's level program that is specifically about game development or design. So there's primarily two entryways into the industry. There's either a computer science degree if you're into the programming aspect of it, or an art degree if you want to get into the art or animation side of it. I myself am from a computer science background. Started off as a quality engineer, then moved up to game design, did project management on the side, and now I do both like production and design on the games that I'm working on. So that's it. I really wanted a quick check that my audio is going through. So could someone just give me a
Yeah,
check here?
everything's good. Everything's good.
All right, all right, all right,
Everything's
right, all
good.
right. Yeah, just need to check, right? So yeah, so that's how you get in, right? One thing I'd like to highlight that's sort of new in the Pakistani industry is that there's two programs that have sort of taken shape, which sort of serve as incubators for, let's say, we call them fresh grads, right? Graduates that come out of their bachelors and want to join up the industry. So one is has sort of started by a coalition of multiple studios, and one is sort of spearheaded by a singular studio. And what they do is that they take in cohorts of fresh grads, they train them in the skills required, and then they hire them based out of that pool. So there's two programs. One is called Game Train. It's an initiative. I think it's government backed as well to some extent. On the other end, the other one is called Mindstorm Labs, made by Mindstorm Studios. So, but both of these do is they take in cohorts, they train them, they give them sessions. It's like a summer long activity, and then they do hirings based out of that. They both have different models, as far as I know, business models, but that's how they work, right? Another aspect that people use to get into the industry is that so when we do our final thesis in our degrees, right? So if that is more gaming oriented, it is a prototype or a small game, right? That's what becomes our portfolio, and that's what we send in to the companies. We drop our CV, drop in that, and just apply for an entry level job. So there's only a handful of positions available in the tier one studios, like I stated, but there's always an opening in the tier two one because they need people. That's because their mantra is quality, quantity over quality. So yeah, that is it. But another thing actually, so game design is something that's a very rare profession here in Pakistan. The thing about game design is that most of the industry, if you talk to them, right, on the Pakistani side, they confuse it with art, specifically 2D art, concept art, and this is an industry-wide confusion. Once when I started working as a game designer at one of the studios, right, I was doing what a game designer does, but whenever someone else tried to talk to me, they would refer to me through the responsibilities of an artist. And this is something I've been trying to educate the local market, that there is a clear differentiation between what a designer does as opposed to what an artist does. And you wouldn't believe that this would exist, but it does. So yeah, that is a summarized view of how our market currently works.
That is quite interesting, actually. There's also, is it a nomenclature issue, or are they just not aware that those are two separate jobs?
I feel like there's a lack of awareness, and primarily since this skill set isn't being taught anywhere. I am a self-taught designer. The ones who do design in their companies, right? They're usually either they've worked in international studios, or they've taught themselves as well. But the ones that are starting these companies that don't know the difference between the nomenclature, I feel like it's just a misinterpretation of what the responsibilities are supposed to be like. So game designers somehow became a 2D artist here.
Huh, that is it. It's because the reason I mention this is because designer in Japan uh, is actually an art job. Um, so all the titles in Japan are quite complicated, quite different than the rest of the world. For example, people who do the job of what we consider game designers are actually called planners. And yeah, so and then if you see somebody that has a title designer on it, like for example, if you hear someone who is like a character designer or a level designer, it's actually it literally means artist. So someone who models characters is called a character designer. Someone who models levels is called level designer. It's quite confusing.
For what it's worth, I mentioned it on the chat too. It also happens a lot in Latin America, and the design is very associated with art, and game design suffers from this, and also industrial design suffers from this because people associate design with art or graphic design, and they stay on that little cage, if you will. And whenever you say game design, people used to get a lot confused, at least here in Uruguay. Now they get it, but it happened just like Nadir said. It's quite common. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about like what people can do when they are in a again a territory that has less gaming jobs locally. What are some advice that you have for people who are seeking jobs and having a hard time finding local openings? Who wants to go first?
I'm happy to give a little bit of advice.
Go
So,
for
I mean, from at least my advice would be is kind of twofold. One is to research and look into potentially remote work, look for jobs that are overseas but allow you to remain within your country. Another good piece of advice is to get involved within your local scene, whether that's through going to game jams or meetups or events. One of the most valuable things, at least I've experienced, is by getting to meet and game jam and talk to people within the industry also makes it easier to break in within the industry or to be on the radar for when job openings are available. And so that's also very useful. And to just keep making cool stuff whenever you can, however you can. I think it's important to also keep in mind the reason we're making the stuff and keep your skills sharp as much as you can. And then spending on time, especially if you're online, going to online events, doing some of the online networking is incredibly valuable because it is also about being able to get yourself into the conversation, advocate for yourself, show off the cool things you do, and just be around people who can give good advice, can mentor you. I mean, that's how I got here onto this panel tonight.
Okay. So, Rod.
Yeah, what Linfo says is like super on point. If you can go to local events, and I read on chat that physical events have been, of course, very limited as of late, but I believe they're popping up again. At least here in Uruguay, we're making them happen again. So with the cautions that need to be involved, but at least we're happy to bring the people back together. And those places are great places to get yourself known, get yourself some skills and test those skills. Game jams are great, definitely are great. But again, there's like this valley when it comes to certain generations of future game developers that have like some sort of arrested development because they couldn't go to physical spaces because of the pandemic, and that needs to pick up again and create those spaces again to nurture those newer developers. But when it comes to digital spaces, places like this one is great. uh, Other discords that are more focused on whatever area you're interested in are great. uh, in fact, when it comes to Latin America, I would suggest you look into your local association, if there's any, to follow them on social networks and see if they're making events, rather either digital or physical. When it comes to Uruguay, it's called CAVI, which is a contraction of Cámara de Videojuegos, which involves the Association of Uruguayan Game Developers. And then there are other places like in Argentina, you have ADVA, you have VG Chile for Chile and stuff like that. You can look them up. I'll put the link on the event chat. There's a federation of these associations from Latin America that involve almost all the countries from the region, like Bolivia, Peru, Chile, Colombia, etc. Those are in the latamvgfederation.org. I'll put the link on the event chat. You look for them, look for the social networks, ask around, and those places are great places to like get yourself known. And again, as Nico said, you need to train your skills so you're also like whenever you show your portfolio or you move around looking for a job, you have proof of your skill set. And there's like a famous saying we have here in Uruguay that I'm gonna translate like straight up to English, which is portfolio trumps degree. As in, you can have a degree on whatever, but if you don't have a portfolio that shows what you can do with those skills, it's harder for you to get into any kind of job, more specifically the video games industry, at least in Latin America, because it's so
But
small
it's
and
everywhere.
like
It's everywhere.
super
If you don't have
specific.
a good portfolio, nobody cares.
Yeah, yeah,
Please continue.
yeah, and yeah, but and that's I think I'm just a bit of I take what Limpo said is go to the events, find those events, try to be there, see if there are communities within your region, your country, your city, whatever, and be active in there in the digital spaces. There's also a Discord server called Latinos in Gaming, which, as the name suggests, is people from Latin America that are in gaming and have. There's even channels specific for each country, so you know the opportunities, the events, the whatnots. I'll share that too on the event chat.
Okay. Nadir.
Yep, I think I totally agree with what's been said, and to expand that on a bit, like from my perspective, would be that if I were to take Pakistan, right, if I were to look at 3 years ago, game jams didn't exist, but now there's at least one major game jam happening every quarter. So like that is an improvement, a massive improvement, right? And these are, I feel like it's more of an information pocket that people don't really know about this, and we need to market that a lot. Like there's a recently revived IGDA chapter for Pakistan that is doing great work and trying to get the word out. And at the same time, I think that there's one avenue that everyone sort of takes if they can't find a job here or they can't land one, and that's freelancing. And I think that's something that we need to put out there as well. That what people usually do is that they, through those jobs, through those gigs, they build up their portfolio, they expand it out, and they make it good enough to land a job if they don't. And it really helps with the skills as well. And people do get some great work done, and that's what we've seen as well. So yeah, that, that's something I think is true.
Okay. Um, Thank you very much. So, yeah,
Should we take questions
yeah. Should
from
we
the
take questions?
community?
Yeah, I was looking at some of the questions in the event chat. So,
Yeah.
I saw something that I actually was not aware of. So, you need visas to work for certain studios, even if you're remote. Is that correct? Dimpo, can you
If you
elaborate on
want
that?
to be, yeah, if you want to be a full-time employee, then there's a good chance that that is accurate, but it really depends on which country from the global south you're coming from and where you're going to. I know that there are visa requirements for UK studios as well, even if you're 100% remote. But that is based off the assumption that you'd be a permanent employee at the studio, not working as a contractor or freelancing for those kinds of places. And it also yeah, it depends.
So wait, let me get this straight. So you have to get a UK visa to work out of South Africa as a permanent
hmm
employee in the UK?
hmm
Wow. Is that like a
Whoa.
special kind of visa?
No, it would be the same kind of visa you'd get for any kind of international work. I think it's like a special skills visa or like yeah, I think it's a special skills visa or a specific work permit that
Hmm.
you'd need to get for I think it's the UK and I think the US as well, but I'm not 100% sure on that because
Okay.
there are quite a lot of countries, and I think it is a little bit different with EU countries, and it just depends on the nature of your employment as well.
That's this is a new revelation for me. We're
Yeah.
actually so we're currently hiring. Um, if you're interested, please check out work with indies. Studio Cut to Bits. We still have a position open for love artist. And so we had 4 positions open, and we've hired 3, and 2 out of the 3 that we hired is remote foreign, and they're full time, but they're not employees. So I guess maybe that's the thing. They're full time freelancers because we have no way to hire people who don't live here because our corporate entity is in Quebec, so we have no way of having employees outside of Quebec.
Yeah, I do remember weird limitations here. Uh,
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
it's typically for full-time employee, like permanent employees, but if you're freelancing
yeah, I guess
or you're
it's
working on a contractor basis, then there's no visa requirements at all.
okay.
And I think especially with smaller indie studios, there is more of a chance of being able to like work for them as a junior, even if it's remote and contract-based work. Because what's really important is being able to build up your portfolio and gain skills.
Yeah, that's something I really do want to emphasize. Majority of the unfortunately, like we made it clear that we were open to juniors in our post, and I think something that I want to emphasize is the majority of the portfolios that we receive are not professional quality work, and unfortunately, even the people who are graduating from game dev schools are not graduating with enough skills to be able to um, work as a professional in the games industry. I think part of the reason is that a lot of programs are non-specific, so they do a little bit of a little bit of characters, a little bit of art, a little bit of this, and a little bit of that, and you don't end up with enough of a specialization to be able to do anything to the expectation of a studio releasing products. So as everyone said, like portfolio, 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 like that's how you're going to get your jobs in this industry. And if you have a good portfolio, increasingly studios care less and less about where you're based out of. Just to kind of give you an example of Montreal, currently there is around 150,000, no, 15,000. I'm sorry, not 150,000. 15,000 game developers. Yeah, 150,000 would be crazy. With
Yeah.
15,000 game developers that work in the extended Montreal area, and basically trying to find talent locally is extremely difficult and also very competitive. So consequently, a lot of the studios are opening up to remote candidates from international areas. We've talked to candidates from New Zealand. We've talked to candidates from Brazil, the United States, Europe. Like we really don't care where you're based out of, as long as you can work with us and you have the professional skills. We're definitely open to work uh, with people from all around the world. And I think we lost Nadir. Oh dear.
Oh no. Is he
I'm
in?
sure
Oh,
I'm
here
sure he'll
he
be back.
is. Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sure
yeah.
he'll be
Here
back.
he is.
Uh,
Nadir, come
Okay.
back.
He's back, yay.
So
Uh,
sorry,
Yay.
I was about to say something about this, but I ended up tapping on disconnect. So
oh,
Go for it.
a I may have a unique perspective on this current topic, primarily because I'm in the process of moving out to Europe for a job there and have associates here as well that are working remotely. So like I can definitely talk about how hard it is for someone who's trying to move out from here towards the normal industry. And if that's something everyone wants to hear, I can go on and on about that for a while. So um so is that something that's on the docket, by the way? I need the go ahead. Just saying.
go ahead, I guess.
I suppose. All right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So something that's quite difficult for us, like I feel like that this might be shared by Rod and Miftif as well, is that the visa process itself takes a long time in a lot of cases, right? And I've missed out in the past year. I've missed out an opportunity where the visa couldn't be processed fast enough for the contract to be like started, and there wasn't a remote option there. So I sort of had to let go of that opportunity. I feel like that even with remote options here, uh, there is a certain stigma that I've seen in the normal industry that it isn't usually like people usually don't prefer hiring from here. Like the only hirings I've seen even remotely from here have been in the Web3 industry, and that's primarily because the main industry isn't touching that, the main game dev industry, right? So there's a huge chunk of developers that are being pulled out of the market for remote positions in NFT games and pay to earn games, and that's something that's happening as well. Whereas the visa process itself, if you do manage to land a job, that takes a whole time. Thankfully, the company that I'm going to go with right now is remote friendly as well, so they're fine with me taking as long as it does. Just to put it in perspective, I think so. I'm going to Austria, and the visa process roughly from Pakistan takes around from 10 months to a year, and I'm on month 5, I think. So that limits the prospects of getting a job if you do manage to land one, and landing it much higher. So yeah, that's just a small little bit of information.
That's totally fair because game development that tends to happen on an extremely urgent basis. So it's very hard to plan for something that's going to happen in a year to 10 months to a year. So yeah,
uh,
I definitely sympathize.
but Marcel, I wanted to add something what you were mentioning when looking at portfolios, and something that happens quite commonly in the region, and I don't know if it happens to you folks, Nadir and Limpo, that uh, you mentioned that the portfolios that some of the portfolios you get don't have the specific skill set or are too broad to be like interesting to pick up, or like what is it, like too broad but not super skilled on one specific
Yeah,
area.
that's
And
the thing. Like it's very broad, but none of it is like n- none of it is at professional quality. So you have like
got it.
okay concept art, you have okay characters and okay like 3D modeling.
All right.
And I look at it and like if you just focused on one of these and just kept at it, you probably would have had much better job prospects.
Mm.
I want to go into that because it's at least in Latin America, what happens is you kind of do that because otherwise you wouldn't have a chance on the current market of studios available. Because there are hardly any studios that need a very specific skill set with very specific level of seniority, if you will. And like you can be like average or above average in a lot of things, but not super skilled on one, and that somehow gives you leverage here because you can show your portfolio around in more places that are needed. And since studios in Latin America, most studios in Latin America are rather small, it's actually welcomed that you kind of have a multiple skill set. And
What's
I don't
the
know if that
size
happens
of
else.
the studios?
Sorry, what?
Sorry, what's the size of the studios?
I mean, you could have studios like less than 5 people, which is kind of common.
Mm.
You can have studios of 10, 30 or something. In Uruguay, the biggest studio, locally based studio, has 50 people. Then you have like multinational stuff that do have bigger offices and bigger teams, but there's this, I don't know, sort of indie thing when it comes to that,
Yeah.
that it's actually welcomed that you can wear multiple hats.
I mean, I totally get that. I think there are similarities to South Africa. I mean, our biggest studio is actually the one I work at. We're 20 people at the moment. Um, but for a lot of the juniors, there is a lot more interest in people who have a strong particular skill or a lot of talent in a particular place. Because at least for the studios, for the more long-lasting studios, you are being hired to do a specific thing, like you're being hired to do game dev or you're being hired to be a concept artist. But in general, there is a value in having like an ability to do a lot of things. But sometimes what we're definitely noticing is that the ability of some of the people coming out of tertiary education university in South Africa is that where that skill level is like it's like slightly below average in everything versus like showing a command or an understanding of all of the parts. So there is a degree of specialization that is necessary, but I think it's more along the lines of for if especially if you're applying for jobs, it would be for bigger studios here, and so it would be you're applying to be a junior programmer or a junior game designer or a junior producer. So it's valuable to have at least one skill set that you're confident enough in that when you're applying for places, you can also lift up the quality of your portfolio. I think that made sense.
No, I get it. I get it. And it actually reminds me way back then when I started as a game designer 10 years ago to one of the like bigger studios back then here in Uruguay. I actually do a lot of coding. I can do salvageable art, if you will, but I was really interested in game design. And back then, my portfolio was tuned up to look like my main skill was in game design. It's classic stuff that candidates do. It's like if you're showing to a job posting that involves game design, you're going to highlight your game design skills. If you're going for a job posting that involves producing, you're going to highlight your producing skills, etc., etc. And at least that's how we've seen things going on here in Latin America, and more specifically, at least we've seen in Uruguay. I've seen this a lot, And I know in Argentina it works kind of the same way, unless you're aiming for more senior level stuff. But you juniors or entry level stuff like that, it's actually the generalists are mostly welcome.
No, 100%. That's super valuable.
I
I would like to
think.
add a
Oh,
different
go ahead.
perspective to this as well. So, yeah, so in my opinion, there's a discrepancy in or differentiation in the acceptance criteria depending on the region as well, right? So the quality of the work that is being done in Pakistan, right? You might be doing great according to that because there's not a lot of knowledge present for certain disciplines, right? The severe lack of what we've seen is in the industry is the tech art or even design as well. There's no specialized design positions for, let's say, economy designers, those who know that stuff. And tech art is also very rare, right? So doing barely enough or just knowing how to do that, right, is sometimes good enough for this industry. But once you try to reach out to, the international industry, then somehow that work doesn't translate to the quality that is required there. And I feel like that serves as a limitation as well, because since there's not enough knowledge or a set criteria on where it needs to be in on the local level, it somehow ends up becoming not good enough for the international level as well. So yeah.
Okay, and I think that's about time. We need to wrap up. Catherine, what do we do?
Yeah.
Is there any last minute thing that we should squeeze in, or shall we?
Uh, so I'm just scanning through the chat. I don't think so. I think we covered pretty much everything. So thank you, Nadir, Rod, Dimple. We so feel free to give your socials, any links that you want to share in event chat for people to follow. Um, and you can maybe like a few ending words of just encouragement. What would you say to our audience to encourage them to apply to the jobs in their specific country?
Go for it. I think that's the big advice is just swing for it, go for it. I think especially if we're from the global south or from a marginalized community, it's easy to be very doubtful of our abilities and skills. But what I found has really helped is actively choosing to believe in yourself, invest in spending time on what you can do, and really put yourself out there. And whenever you can, advocate for better conditions, get involved however you can within the local community, and speak to the people who have the ability to advocate on your behalf, on your industry's behalf, to make things better in ways will active that will actively benefit yourself. And if you ever feel like you can't make it, I am a Black woman on the tip of Africa, signed to, working for a game studio, signed to a publisher I cannot mention who is international. So it is possible. It's just unfortunately a lot harder for us. And whenever you can and however you can, take care of yourself, take care of your mental health, and don't let anybody tell you shit. Mm.
Great parting words. Rod, I'll put you on the spot.
Oh my God! After that, I don't know what to say. That was brilliant. That was thank you, Limpo. Definitely, that's yeah. I cannot add that much because she said it all. It's go for it, give it your best shot. Latin America is it's not that far off from like the big places where games are happening, but do get involved with your community. If you have a hard time being around people, do it digitally, because if anything, the pandemic has in, like catalyzed all these places where you can gather with people without being physically there, and have like open the floodgates with those kind of things. Do go out there, find what's happening in your locals, find out what's happening in your region. If you can take a small trip to another country, another city, whatever. Next week is EVA, which is Exposición de Videojuegos Argentina. As the name suggests, it's in Argentina. And they have a great move when it comes to portfolios, which is actually a portfolio day. Like, these folks are going to review your portfolio. Maybe it's not the time to do it now because probably the subscription is like the inscription. I mean, it's closed by now. But be on the lookout for similar events if you have like doubts when it comes to your portfolio, and do go to your local gatherings. Don't take shit from anybody. I love that line. Please do. Please take it into consideration. I mean, and yeah, just go for it.
Beautiful. Nadir?
I feel like what's needed to be said has been said, but the only my 2 cents on this would be that passion takes you a long way. And what I'd like to say is that try to do your best every day you can. And for me, if I were to say that, like while I was studying, right, and thinking that I'd be making games as a career, never thought it would be possible in Pakistan, but it happened. And I feel like it should be a responsibility for people who do tend to sort of get to work here in the games industry, that they should pass it along as well. They should try and help and others, get to where they are, or even, surpass them, and just help as much as they can, so that once they go up, everyone else goes up, and the industry itself starts to, it starts to boom, and then things get better, right? Because next, I want to think that the next time we're having this talk, let's say 5 years later, right, there's a lot more people that can just share their experiences, and that the fact that they have made it in the industry. And like that's actually it, like, try and do as much as you can every day, and try and help others as much as you can. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. Thank you to our guests. And yeah, again, feel free to share your socials, any links you want to share in event chat. And Masao, do you want the parting words as well?
I yes. Thank you for coming. And as I mentioned before, it's all about your portfolio. Work on your crafts. Increasingly, more and more places are hiring remotely. If you're great at what you do, you're going to be able to find a job no matter where you are, as long as you have a internet connection. So, it's yeah. If you don't have internet connection, it's going to be tough. But joking aside, it's really becoming a global market for talent. And one more thing is to kind of lean into what Dimpa was saying. Reach out to people. There are tons of people who are out there that are happy to mentor people to help you grow in your skills. There are more and more organizations that are designed to try to address the inequity of opportunity and mentorship in the global south. So look into those places, find people that can help you, and yeah, work on your craft. There are jobs definitely out there. So yeah, that's my parting word.
Amazing. Well, thank you, everyone. I will end the event now. Have a great weekend, I guess. We're Thursday. Yes, okay. Goodbye.
Bye
Thanks, everyone.
bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.